Julius Caesar arrived in Britain in around 55 BC. He described Britain as a land of small farms, but what he and later Roman invaders would have also found is an abundance of small fortified settlements on top of hills covering the landscape, like you see behind me. 850 years before the Romans arrived, the early Britons made a technological leap forward, moving from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, when they learnt how to smelt iron, a much more abundant and versatile metal than bronze. During this period, the Britons started to move up onto high ground, constructing hill forts to build their settlements in. Over the course of this documentary, I will be looking at the reasons why they did this, and specifically looking at two such examples here in Wiltshire and attempting to discover why a tribe would have moved from one to the other. Cultures and civilizations around the world discovered the secret of smelting iron at different times. It is thought that the first iron tools were used in around 1200 BC in Turkey and Syria. As populations in this period were isolated, technology spread slowly, hindered by distance or obstacle. It is generally accepted that the first iron tools started being used in Britain at around 800 BC. Before the discovery of iron, most cultures had relied on tools made from stone or bronze, but the components of bronze were hard to come by and were therefore expensive, so were only used by the wealthy. Iron had many benefits over bronze and stone. Firstly, iron ore was more abundant than the components of bronze, copper and tin. Secondly, iron was far more versatile than either bronze or stone. In addition, creating iron from its ore was a lot easier than making bronze, even if it was still a long process. The abundance of iron and its ability to be worked and repaired meant that all sorts of new tools could be created to help Iron Age tribes perform tasks more efficiently, giving them more time. In addition to this, because iron became so readily available, almost everyone could afford some iron tools or weapon, unlike with bronze, which was generally only owned by the rich. With the Iron Age came some significant advances in technology. Iron was used in agriculture by farmers in several ways. They used an iron tip on the end of their ploughs so they could plough a larger area and plant more food. To harvest this increased amount of food, Iron Age people would have used an iron sickle to cut these crops. With this increased production of food, other time-saving devices such as the rotary quern were invented. The quern was a device consisting of two large round stones, one on top of the other, which were rotated in order to grind grain to make flour. Innovations in food were not the only technological advancements that the Iron Age brought. The wood-turning lathe and the potter's wheel allowed Iron Age peoples to create superior tools and components such as spokes for wagon wheels, as well as better pots and vessels for carrying food and water. Although advances in technology and the availability of iron meant that food production was easier than ever, Iron Age life still very much revolved around agriculture. People would have lived in small, tight-knit groups of family farms forming tribes or clans. These people would have spent most of their time tending their fields and livestock. As food was ever scarce, most of these tribes would have resorted to raiding neighbouring settlements to steal more of this life-sustaining resource. Can you tell me what Iron Age life would have been like?
In short, it was hard, brutish and short. Hard? Well, it was a constant struggle to survive, to grow enough food, and to be there in the spring after that cold, shocking winter. Brutish? Well, they were in an almost constant state of conflict thanks to this lack of food that they could grow. And of course, the advent of iron really meant that they could fight and be more lethal when fighting. Gone were just a simple Stone Age cudgel and sharpened stick, and in was a iron-headed spear, axe, and even swords were beginning to become slightly more common. And then short, because life was short for all of those factors, and of course diseases and injury. In injury, a simple cut to the hand with dirt in it became infected, and therefore, there was no way of treating it. People would die.
Each family would have lived in a roundhouse, which evidence shows were actually quite large, as not only would they house parents and children, but also grandparents and livestock as well. They were circular one-room buildings that contained everything that the family needed to live day to day, including fire to cook on, a clay kiln to bake bread, which was a staple of Iron Age life, as well as a loom to weave fabric and beds to sleep on. During the Iron Age, across Britain, hillforts started to appear. A hillfort is a type of fortification that was built on top of an existing hill. It was created by steepening the sides of the hill and using the excess earth to create additional banks and ditches around the top to make it even more difficult to attack. There are several commonly accepted reasons that Iron Age tribes began to move to higher ground. Firstly, the availability of iron tools and weapons meant that raids and intertribal warfare were far more common in this period. The aim of combat in this period was not to conquer land, but rather to steal resources and captives from neighbouring tribes. This is why it makes sense for Iron Age civilization to move up into more defensible locations. In addition to defence, Iron Age hillforts would have created a social hub where people could come for both social and religious events. It is likely that not all the people would have lived inside the hillfort all the time, rather farmed the surrounding area and merely travelled inside when they needed to. The hillforts provided a place where people could come and meet, allowing blacksmiths and other trades to begin to emerge. So why would Iron Age people have decided to live inside hillforts?
Well, throughout history we find populations living in obscure and difficult places to get to, halfway up a cliff in caves, on top of mountains, where they were far from convenient routes to trade, moving from one place to another, and of course that life-giving water had to be carried up, and water is a heavy commodity, and we humans and our animals need an awful lot of it. So one has to conclude that the motivation was for security. Gather together on top of the hill where they can see the enemy coming, they can build ramparts around them for a degree of protection from raiders who are after food, or your women folk, for instance.
Hillforts are easily recognisable by the large banks and ditches that surround them. These defences meant that any would-be attacker would not only have to climb the steep sides of a hill, but also conquer these extra defences as well. These barriers were not naturally occurring and would have taken tribespeople a very long time to construct in a period of history where time was precious. These banks were likely patrolled by guards and sentries in a similar way to what would have happened in a medieval castle. It is also highly likely that atop some of these banks would have been a wooden palisade wall.
But of course, evidence of archaeology, particularly at Scratchbury, shows that some of these people lived outside of the walls, but within reasonably close proximity, so that with their farm and their animals, they could get inside the protection of the hilltop fairly quickly.
Across Britain, there is a high concentration of these fortified settlements. Wiltshire has around 30 of these settlements that stretch across the county, suggesting that this area of the country was relatively densely populated. This is perhaps due to the soft, fertile ground or the availability of mineral resources.
Just to the east of Warminster, Wiltshire, over there are two hill forts, Scratchbury and Battlesbury. Archaeology shows that these two settlements were created and occupied at different times. The close proximity, however, and the archaeology of these settlements suggests that the tribe that lived on Scratchbury abandoned it in favour of creating a new settlement here on Battlesbury. Creating one of these hill forts, however, was a massive undertaking. So why would a tribe that already had one built over on Scratchbury decide to go through all of the effort of creating a new one here on Battlesbury?
In order to assess the reasons that the Scratchbury tribe decided to move to Battlesbury Hill, I took several approaches. Firstly, I decided to visit the site at Scratchbury Hill to look at the topography to see if there was anything that stood out there as a potential weakness in the location. Adding to this further, I looked at aerial photographs and maps of the two hill forts and others in the surrounding area to see if there are any features that stood out as obviously different. Finally, I looked at the archaeological reports to see if there was anything else that stood out there.
Firstly, Scratchbury Hill is very large. This had several benefits, but one major flaw. The large area enclosed by its defences meant that livestock could live on top of the hill permanently protected, and more people could live there full time as well. However, this large perimeter would have been incredibly hard to defend. It would have required a lot of people as there were so many potential angles of attack.
And the lie of the land, in particular around the other side, is a tactical weakness. It is possible to get up quite close to the walls of the hill fort without being seen, and then the land flattens out for the last bit. So it'd be entirely conceivable for raiders to get up close, assemble, and then rush the walls in that area before the defenders could muster to their palisades.
Although the archaeological digs that have happened at the site have not found direct evidence of battle, the hill enclosure and the surrounding area contain a number of burial mounds, which could suggest why there were no bodies found along the banks or other defences. Bodies were, however, found in the ditches at Battlesbury, which indicates that combat did indeed happen in this area.
As living in close proximity in large populations encourages diseases to spread more easily through populations, it is possible that a plague or illness spread through the tribe. As they were intensely superstitious, this could have led them to believe that the area was cursed, making them want to move.
Another theory is based on local law that the name Scratchbury, translated as Devil's Hill, could be a pointer to what happened, some disaster, a plague, raid, or something that convinced the people that the devil lurked there. But whether this is true or not, we really don't know.
Having looked at the Park Hill Camp hill fort near Stourton, it shares some common features with Scratchbury. Firstly, although it had a good view of approaches from two sides, similarly to Scratchbury, it also had several partly covered approaches. This suggests that a 360-degree field of view was not an essential feature of hill forts in this period. This does not, however, mean that this was not a factor in the decision to abandon Scratchbury. There are several reasons why what worked at Park Hill Camp might not have worked at Scratchbury. Firstly, Park Hill Camp is far smaller, so it would have been easier to rush defenders to any side that was under attack. It is also further from other hill forts, so it is possible that the tribe at Park Hill Camp did not have to worry about being attacked as much as at Scratchbury.
In order to assess the reasons that the people might have wanted to move, I've come over to Battlesbury Hill. As primarily defensive structures, I think that it's highly likely that it was a defensive concern that caused the people to want to go through all of the time and effort that was involved in constructing a new home. What adds weight to this assumption is the fact that Battlesbury has a far smaller perimeter to defend, as well as a good field of view from all sides. Adding further to this, as we can see here, the earthworks and defences are far more developed here on Battlesbury than what we found on Scratchbury, being almost twice as deep. Another likely reason that I think could be valid is some kind of disease or plague. As Iron Age people were intensely superstitious, it's very believable they could have misinterpreted some kind of illness as a curse or bad omen. What makes this even more likely is the fact that they were living in such close proximity with each other and animals, as the evidence shows they were on Scratchbury. This means it could have very easily happened, and likely did, in other places, if not here. Having looked at the etymology of the name Scratchbury, scratch meaning devil, this idea does support the theory that some sort of natural disaster, such as a plague or famine, could have occurred, leading the tribe to associate the site with some sort of curse or bad omen. I think this is quite unlikely though, however, as the word scratch actually travelled across with Norse invaders much later in our history. It is possible that the hill was named this because of stories that are passed down through the generations, but I simply think this is untrue, as the distance in time is so great, as the Norse invaders arrived around 800 years after the hill was abandoned. Having looked at the Iron Age and the ways that people led their lives, it is clear that the discovery of iron allowed them to create new tools and technologies, although it also allowed them to fight amongst themselves with increased effectiveness. It is this increased rate of intertribal warfare and raids that led the tribespeople to create hill forts in order to defend their resources. This is why, after looking at the archaeology, walking the sites myself and comparing them with other hill forts in the surrounding area, I think that the defensive settlement at Scratchbury was moved to Battlesbury for primarily defensive concerns. It is, however, possible that it was a combination of this and some other disastrous event, such as a disease or famine, which the superstitious Iron Age people took as some sort of omen or curse. Either way, it is still inspiring to imagine the great fortifications of our ancestors that would have once covered our landscape.